Gaius Marius was born in 157 BC in Latium. His family wasn't rich, but he had some noble connections, so he was able to marry a noblewoman and hold local office and join the military. He came from humble beginnings, and eventually he rose to the top, like a balloon. Lucius Cornelius Sulla Felix. That's a cool name. He was born in 139 BC in Rome. Sulla married into a powerful family, a rich family, and became a military leader between Rome and the other places that Rome controlled. Sulla and Marius became two of the most famous men in Rome during their lives through their military conquests, political careers, clash for power. They were a leading cause to the decline and destruction of the Roman Republic. Now let's find out what they really represented and understand the legacy that they left behind. Around the year 133 BC, Marius gets a ranked job in the government, which is pretty cool. And it's pretty much the beginning of his career. And see, it's important to remember, just keep this in mind, that Marius is about 20 years older than Sulla. Just keep that in the back of your head. And a few years later, in 123 BC, Marius becomes a quaestor, just a financial office. And this is the start to his climb up the cursus honorum. In 119 BC, Marius became tribune of the people. The tribune of the people was the office that was in charge of the rights of the plebeians. This raised him up one step on the cursus honorum, and in 115 BC, Marius becomes praetor, which is basically a judge. Being a praetor is only one step away from consul, and in 114 BC, Marius becomes the governor of a region called Further Spain, aka Hispania Ulterior. Being a governor was basically like one step higher than consul, which is pretty sweet. And when Spain became a province of the Roman Republic, it was subdivided into two sections, Hispania Ulterior and Hispania Citerior, which means near and further Spain. In 112 BC, Marius marries Julia, who was part of a very powerful patrician family, and this makes Marius the uncle of Julius Caesar. Awesome. After getting married, Marius returns to the military and is placed in charge of fighting Jugurtha. Jugurtha was the king of Numidia, which is modern-day Algeria and Tunisia, and the war between Jugurtha and Rome was part of the Roman defeat of North Africa. Marius was realized that the Romans could not win, so he made a deal with one of Jugurtha's old enemies who betrayed Jugurtha. This led to his capture and Roman victory. Jugurtha was buried alive under a prison. Marius and Sulla actually work on the same side during this time, as they are both in the Roman military. Because Marius is a senior member of the army, and Sulla is not quite known as a leader yet, Sulla works under Marius. Marius's ideas were the reason that Rome was able to beat Jugurtha, but somehow Sulla managed to convince everyone that it was him, and he was credited with this victory. This is the first time that we see a disagreement between Marius and Sulla. Marius still got some of the credit though, and here it turned to Rome a hero. He became a consul in Rome for 9 years in a row, which no one had ever done before, because there used to be a rule that one person had to wait 10 years in between consulships. Some of the rich people who liked to keep things the same way didn't really like that he changed up the whole system. Even though he was pretty good and did some pretty good things for Rome, these rich people, called the optimates, were usually against him because he was poor. And he didn't have a good family. He wasn't rich. Meanwhile, Sulla had some little jobs in government and the military, and he was working his way up. In 91 BC, this thing called the Social War was started. The Social War was between Rome and the rest of Italy. Rome and these Italian states used to be friends, but the Italians were mad because they worked hard for Rome in the army, but Rome didn't give them citizenship, which was a really big deal back then. Sulla wasn't really famous when it started, but he got to control a big part of the Roman army, and when Rome won, he got a lot of the credit. Marius was getting kind of old at this point, and he was sick during the war, so he didn't have an important job. And Marius and Sulla, they hadn't really started being against each other yet, so they were on the same side for this war. The year that the social war ended, Sulla was elected consul. There was a king named Mithridates who killed 80,000 Romans. So Rome had to pick someone to lead the army and go fight him. The rich people, called the Optimates, chose Sulla. Don't worry, we didn't forget about Sulla. But the poor people, called the Populares, chose Marius. Uh-oh. Because of the position that one of the poor people had the final say. Marius officially got the job, and Sulla was a bit salty. He still had the army from the war that just ended, so he took him into Rome, and he forced everyone to choose him. This was the beginning of Sulla's military dictatorship regime. You see, Marius and the rest of the consuls, they didn't have enough power to stop Sulla, so he took over full power, became a full-time dictator over Rome. The first piece of legislation that was introduced by Sulla was called prescription. It was a judicial device meant to take out all of his enemies, to kill him, just kill him. It was a full public list of everyone that he hated, granting a reward to any person who brought them in dead or alive. And if the list was ever empty, he'd just add more people to it to be killed. Brutally. Nobody wanted to kill Marius during the prescriptions because he was old, and that would be sad. So they did the next best thing. They sent him to North Africa. But the North Africans didn't want him either. So Marius made his way back to Rome, and along the way, he freed slaves to be a part of his army. He met up with his friend Cinna, who just happened to be on his way out of Rome because he was exiled too, and together they came into Rome with their ragtag army and killed a bunch of people. Sulla was still the consul, but he told Marius he would let Marius have Rome if he stopped killing people. Marius took Rome, but he kept killing people anyway, and he and his pal Cinna were the consuls for about a year, but they both died because they were old. Sulla was fighting a different guy at the time, but then he heard Marius had died, so he was like, yay, and then he wanted to be a dictator. So he made himself the dictator, and he had some pretty good ideas, and he gave out power to different groups in the government, so it was more well-balanced. And then he decided he had enough of the stress of leading world power, so he got himself a trophy wife, retired to his estate, and then died after a few years. Marius and Sulla, they may have fought each other a lot, but in the end, they were both kind of evil, and they both had some pretty good ideas that helped improve Rome, but they each killed a bunch of people for basically no reason, which is pretty lame.